In the tangled backwoods of southeastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian foothills meet the Cumberland Plateau, there exists a story that local historians have quietly debated for over a century and a half. Court records from 1847 mention an unusual civil case involving two Negro women of extraordinary stature and a transaction so peculiar that the presiding judge ordered the testimony sealed. The town clerk's handwritten note in the margin reads simply, "God help us all." Three families who lived through those events left behind contradictory accounts, each sworn under oath, each impossible to fully believe. What happened when a struggling Kentucky farmer made a choice that should have destroyed him, only to receive an offer that defied every principle of the era? The truth, buried in forgotten county archives and family Bibles, is more unsettling than any legend. Before we continue with the story of Silas Harrigan and the two women who changed everything he believed about mercy and survival, if you're listening from Kentucky, Tennessee, or anywhere along the old river routes where these events unfolded, leave a comment telling us where you're from. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear for more forgotten American mysteries, and let's discover together what really happened on that November morning in 1847. The story begins not with heroism, but with desperation so complete it had its own smell. Unwashed skin, sour whiskey breath, and the particular odor of dreams rotting in Kentucky clay. The autumn of 1847 found Silas Harrigan precisely where he'd been for 6 years, shin deep in creek mud, trying to coax something, anything, from 40 acres of stubborn Kentucky clay. At 34, he looked a decade older. Deep lines bracketed his mouth. His hands, once steady enough to thread a needle by candlelight, now trembled most mornings until the first drink. The farm sat 12 miles south of Barbourville, in a hollow so narrow the sun only reached the cabin for 4 hours each winter day. Locals called it Harrigan's Hole, though never to his face. Some said the land was cursed. Others said Silas had simply chosen poorly, picking a plot that would break any man's back and spirit. His wife Ruth had died in childbirth 3 years prior, taking their only son with her. The small wooden cross he'd carved still stood by the eastern fence line, weathered gray as the stones around it. He'd planted wildflowers there the first spring after her death. By the second spring he couldn't bring himself to look at the grave. By the third spring he'd stopped counting days entirely. Time became a blur of failed crops, mounting debts, and bottles emptied in the dark. Harrigan wasn't a man given to philosophy or politics. He'd been raised Methodist, taught that hard work and godliness would be rewarded in this life and the next. But 3 years of evidence suggested otherwise. He knew his neighbors whispered about his drinking, about the way he'd let the fields go to thistle and broom sedge after Ruth's death. The Methodist congregation had stopped including him in their Sunday invitations. When he walked into town, conversations quieted. People found reasons to cross the street. He'd become what every small community feared. A reminder that tragedy could strike anyone, that God's grace was distributed with mysterious unfairness. He owed the dry goods store in town $47, a fortune he had no way to repay. The store owner, a pinched-faced man named Carmichael, had started making pointed comments about when payment might be expected. Soon those comments would become demands, then threats, then legal action. Harrigan had seen it happen to other farmers. They lost everything. Some moved west. Some moved into poverty so complete they became invisible. Some simply disappeared, leaving behind only questions and unpaid debts. His nearest neighbor, a tanner named Vernon Pitts, lived 2 miles west along a path that became impassable in heavy rain. Vernon had tried in the early days after Ruth's death to be helpful. He'd brought food, offered to help with the harvest, invited Silas to supper. But Harrigan had rebuffed every gesture, retreating further into his grief and his whiskey until even patient Vernon gave up. Now they maintained the bare minimum of neighborly relations. A wave from a distance, a nod at church functions Silas rarely attended. Kentucky in 1847 existed in a state of nervous tension. The state allowed slavery but sat precariously close to free territories across the Ohio River.